you to do that. We're going to try to get him up to, let's say 30, 40,000 subs. That sounds good. Maybe 100 million, billion, something along those lines. I've got a few hundred out of this. It'll be fine. I know somebody just noted Red's Rhetoric is having a hangout. Yes, I am aware of that. He has all my normal viewers. It's okay. I'm not competing with Reds. He's competing with me at this stage. So, but I love Reds. Watch what you want to watch. But I think this is going to be far more interesting because he's just going to be talking about flat Earth. We're going to be talking about street epistemology. So, Anthony, you are the street epistemologist guy.
Hey.
What is street epistemology? I kind of have a basic understanding, but from your words, how do you describe it?
Oh, thanks for having me on your show, Steve. So, street epistemology is a conversational approach to investigating all sorts of different belief claims. It started with a book by Dr. Peter Boghossian, where he was encouraging people to use street epistemology with those who believe in gods. And typically, the reasons why people believe in a god is because of faith. But what we found from the nearly 5 years of having these talks is that you can use this method for pretty much any claim. So people have taken his idea and run with it in exciting directions. And it's interesting to see this method being applied to people who think that karma is real, or that they've seen a ghost, or their view on a political topic, for example, or some social issue. Some of the best conversations that I've had have been with atheists who are absolutely certain that there's a God. I had a couple talks a few weeks ago with a few people who thought that when you see a specific bird, that it's a deceased relative that's coming by to say hello. So SE is a way of engaging with a person without triggering the backfire effect, and helping them reflect on how they form their belief, and questioning in a nice way how they could be so sure that it's true.
So it really is a way to determine if what they think, or what they believe, I should actually say, actually comports with reality in a way that they have some kind of epistemic certainty on a scale, like from 0 to 100.
Pretty much. Yeah. The scale is optional. You don't have to employ a scale, but for those of us who want to see if this conversation is having any impact whatsoever on the person's certainty, we do like to ask generally where a person is in terms of their confidence, 1 to 10, or I like to do 0 to 100 to get a sense of how strong their belief, their confidence is in that belief. And what's really interesting is that people will tend to lower their confidence, if not on the spot, days or weeks later after they had some time to think about it. I usually give people a card, and it's not uncommon for people to message me, or I'm able to see them again and have a follow-up, and then they report a lowered confidence in whatever claim they thought is true.
So this is a way to plant that seed of and I hate the word we use doubt, but it is kind of doubt in some ways.
Oh, it is. It's a seed of doubt. Okay. I mean, I want to plant that seed of doubt. If somebody has an unreliable method for arriving at a truth, me telling them that you have an unreliable method is probably going to trigger a backfire effect. They'll be more defensive. But if they're able to discover it on their own from your questions, you are imparting a seed of doubt, or the gift of doubt, is all I like to put it. And that's a good thing. It's beneficial to have doubt. It's beneficial to question the beliefs that we're forming, because most people, I think, want to have an accurate map of reality.
Yeah, I think that when we talk about beliefs, at least in the Great Debate community, and by the way, I do welcome you to the Great Debate community. We've been trying to arrange this for a while. People have been asking about this, so this is a huge thing. I'm really going to enjoy this conversation, enjoying it now. So the whole thing about belief is a person not claiming knowledge, right? A person is just saying, I have this particular belief. Usually it's a propositional state. I know that people love to get into the nuances of what is atheism. I think the conversation gets bogged down at that point. But when you have a belief, you're saying that a proposition is true such that it comports with reality. There's a mapping feature that says, okay, this proposition is true, that you believe it is in the universal sense. And not all propositions are like that. There's some fictional propositions that doesn't apply to. But you're trying to get a person to say, okay, is the belief that you're purporting to have something that actually does map to reality, correct?
Pretty much. Now, I'll ask a person to select a belief that they think is true. And then when I ask them their confidence, they'll very often say 100%, I know that this belief is true. So when I meet people, they're not using these words in the philosophical manners. That they often blur the lines between belief and knowing. Mm-hmm. And I'm not academically trained in this. Boghossian wrote this book for people, I think, exactly like me, that give them a cursory understanding of what these words mean, go out and have conversations with people and figure out if their method for getting to that belief, to that certainty, is reliable. So, but yeah, it is interesting how many people will say, no, I don't believe it. I know that this is true.
Yeah,
but
Dr.
the questioning is not any different, whether they say, yeah, I'm 80% sure that this belief is true, or I'm 100% and I know that this thing is true.
Do you want to tell people about Dr. Boghossian? I mean, I understand that he does want to eliminate the faith-based things. He wants to eliminate religion, I think. I don't disagree with his reasoning behind a lot of things. I think that he's a little maybe pie in the sky at this point. I don't think religion is something that could just kind of go away. I think that over time, if we keep on finding scientific reasons for things, then I think, yes, maybe religion will be diminished over a period of time. But I don't think it's something that can be just eliminated outright. And I know he calls it a virus, which I think it's inflammatory in some ways. But you when I watch your videos, by the way, I've been watching, try to say that 5 times fast.
I was going to ask how many you watched.
Oh, actually. I don't know. Well over dozen to 15, maybe more, and maybe not just those videos. I've also watched like you giving lectures and stuff like that. So
good.
I probably got 20 plus videos in total. The one that I just finished watching, the last one, you were giving a lecture explaining the core properties of SE and showing some videos, and you actually showed a video of you having a backfire effect. And then saying 2 years later, you went back to that street preacher. And I thought that was great. I was like, look, here you're showing how not to do something, because obviously there's something called the backfire effect, or called entrenchment effect, which is somebody is going to be more likely to double down on their belief rather than open up and want to listen to what somebody has to say, correct?
Yeah, that's such a big premise of Boghossian's book. Yes, he has some strong views on God believers and faith as a method for coming to a truth. And I think I share his concern about that as I share his concern about faith as an epistemology, because I think faith is unreliable. Just ask a person to define that word, go with their definition, and start asking questions, and it becomes pretty evident how unreliable faith is. But so the major premise of street epistemology is to engage with a person about their belief, but avoid triggering that backfire effect, avoid triggering the defensive mechanisms that can come up if you ridicule somebody, if you give them counter arguments against their position, if you try to present them with facts. It seems so counterintuitive. You think, oh, if I just show a person how mistaken they are and give them this report, they're going to change their mind. But it doesn't work that way. And street epistemology is a way of getting around those defensive mechanisms so a person is honestly reflecting on the beliefs that they formed. And you do that by asking questions. I ask a lot of questions. I'm very rarely am I telling somebody what the facts are or even what my position is. I really want to try to remain neutral and not skew them one way or the other.
You want to solicit information from them, not give them your perspective, right? This is trying to do some kind of Socratic method on their belief system, correct?
Right, but I do recognize that at some point it could be rude to not answer their questions. So they might say, well, you're asking me all these questions about why I think God is real. What do you think? Do you believe in a God? And I might say, well, if it's okay with you, can we just finish the next, do 5 more minutes of me just asking you questions, and I'll answer any question that you have. Because sometimes disclosing your view on a position, whether it's a political position or my view about cardinals coming back and representing deceased loved ones, or my view on the whole God thing, people can become defensive when they hear that I'm a non-believer, and they may be less open to examining their belief. So there's a fine line. Like, I don't want to sway them, but I also don't want to be a dick and just ignore all their questions to me.
Right, you come across as evasive if you do that.
Yeah, it does need to be a conversation. It does need to be a back and forth.
Yeah, okay. I mean, all cards on the table. I mean, my channel, I know you know a little bit of my channel, but my channel really was initially set up to just debunk young creationism. However, I found that there are several people in the community that do it far better than I do. Not going to lie. Apologia being one of them. Are you familiar with him?
I've seen a few videos.
Love Apologia. But I mean, we have conversations. So my channel has now kind of evolved to the place to have conversations similarly to what you would have as a street epistemology thing, at least organic conversations. We have people like Dr. Hugh Ross on, Dr. Fuzz Rana, Mary Schweitzer. I mean, we have a prolific amount of guests on. But we also have people that we're not going to change their minds. And these, I admit that there's some kind of mockery there. I'm not going to take the high road. I'm not going to say that we don't do that, because I know that these people are not going to change their mind. There are only like a dozen of them. At that point, it's just, there's no hope for them, in my opinion. So I'm not going to play this moral high ground where I think that every conversation has to be productive. Some of them, it's just for entertainment value. This one obviously is
that's
for
interesting.
productive value.
Are you having the debate though with people because you think your audience there might be people in your audience who may be convinced?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm doing it for the audience more than I am for the person, because if I engage with somebody that I know is completely entrenched in young Earth creationism, and they tell me literally, there's no evidence you could provide to me they'll ever get me to accept evolutionary theory or that the Noah's Ark wasn't real. Okay, fine, I accept that. At that point, I'm not going to try to do anything to change their mind, but I want people in the audience to see, here's a person that is just not willing to reformulate their belief structure or their epistemology to comport what we know to be scientifically correct. And I do state that as facts. I'm not ambivalent about that. When I say that the age of the Earth is factually billions of years old, I mean that, right? And I have no hesitation. But anyways, look who just dropped in, Ozzy.
Hello, sir.
You got to do the Ozzy, like the clouds have parted. Anyways, no, it's just Oz. Welcome, Oz. Glad you made it.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, that's not at all embarrassing as an introduction.
Oh, come on. It's okay.
We just got started.
He's already
can I just mention one thing? Can I just mention one thing, Steve, that you just said?
Yes, please.
To adjust that? You talked about still engaging with people, even though you suspect that they're going to probably not change their minds, but you know that an audience is watching. And I completely understand that being aggressive and debating with somebody, presenting them with facts, even though it may not change their mind, they're going to be defensive. There is a benefit to have people observing that and changing their mind. The disconnect, though, is that I think a lot of atheists watch that. They watch your discussion with somebody who's being obstinate and you're providing them with facts, and they think, oh, that's the way that I need to talk to my aunt the next time she tells me about a young Earth.
Right.
And that's the disconnect that concerns me, because it seems like that is not the best approach when you want to have a one-on-one. If you truly value the relationship and you do want to help a person reflect on their belief, it seems like the Socratic approach of street epistemology in a one-on-one appears to be more effective than just presenting my aunt with evidence about an old Earth, for example.
I absolutely agree with that. Each situation obviously is different. I mean, I shouldn't say that no one's without hope. I mean, there have been people that have reversed their positions. Wayne Fillmore, I had a debate with him on evolution, and it was on macroevolution. And literally 2 hours later, he looked up what I told him to look up, and he came back and said, you know what, Steve? You're right. Macroevolution does exist. I have to question some things now. He took about a month. He just kind of separated from like all of us. He did his thing, and he came back and he's like, you know what? I can no longer accept young Earth creationism.
Wow. Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, that's pretty rare. I don't hear a lot of that.
Rare. I've had 2 or 3 limited successes with that, with people that actually given it up. But you're right. The approach that you would take with somebody one-on-one, or especially with family, is a lot different than some of the approaches we take with some of the people that come in that are just hardened to the fact that their belief is unequivocally correct, and they start with that presupposition, right? They start there. They cannot be wrong. That's a very difficult position to kind of chink away at, don't you think?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think so. And I've used the debate / aggressive ridicule approach with family, and I've jeopardized those relationships almost to the point where we barely talk. And it's one of the reasons why I've invested a lot of my time and interest in SE, because I've seen relationships get repaired because of this more Socratic approach of questioning. I hear from atheists all the time. I just got a message this morning, I should read it, saying, I've learned SE and it's making me a better person because I know I'm more comfortable with my views. I'm more respectful of the person that I'm talking to. I see them more as victims of a faulty epistemology as opposed to just an idiot that I need to crush with data. So it seems that, maybe the unsung benefit of SE could be the benefit that it seems to have on atheists who are learning this method, and it's improving their relationships.
Yeah, and I think that's one thing I will bring up real quick since we have Ozzy in here, about atheists arguing better. And I had spoken to you before on this, and I hope Ozzy will agree with me that we want atheists to become better interlocutors. I kind of get annoyed when I see an atheist making a bad argument more than I do a theist, and I don't know why. But there's some reason why I think that, look, if an atheist accepts science, and atheists generally do, not all of them, but I admit there are spiritual atheists, there's non-metaphysical naturalist atheists, there's all kinds of atheists. But for the most part, most of the atheists I know accept things like theory of evolution, Big Bang cosmology, those things. So I think they're at least ahead of the curve as far as a young Earth creationist, right? And so when I see them take those steps to say, okay, these theories are correct, they model what we think to be reality, and then they make some really horrific argument to a theist, it just for some reason kind of sticks in my craw. And I don't know how Ozzy feels about that, but Ozzy, do you kind of know what I'm saying on that? That is it weird for me to think that I think that an atheist should have a better argument to a theist? I probably am wrong on that. It should be equal, but I think they all should have good arguments, but.
Well, I think we all have a vested interest in people whose views resemble our own coming off as rational, right? I mean, I don't sort of go around identifying as an atheist. I wear the label because it's descriptive. It describes my position, so I call myself an atheist. But I don't go around say, hi, I'm Ozzy and I'm an atheist. I don't go around doing that. But when people ask me my position, I tell them what my position is. I'm an atheist, and if they ask me what I mean by that, I say, well, I don't think there are any gods, and here's why, if you care. And it's always a little bit embarrassing when there's someone out there who wears the same label, whether they mean the same thing by it or not, who is arguing poorly for that position. Even if it's not exactly your position, if they're wearing the same label, you end up getting tarred by the same brush. I just heard a funny noise. Am I still being heard, or
Yes.
am I frozen?
No,
Yeah. Okay. Sorry.
Yeah, I can hear you.
So, I mean, I feel exactly the same way you do, Steve. When I hear a fundamentalist evangelical, engaged in a lot of bad apologetics and bad reasoning, it doesn't impinge on me. It discredits them and anyone else who'd wear the label that they want to wear. It doesn't reflect badly on me, but because we don't want to be tarred with the same brush. Obviously, we care when people who are on our side who wear the same kinds of labels that we do. It can be a political label, whether you're a liberal or a conservative, whatever. You just don't like it when people who wear the same label are arguing poorly for your position. So yeah, it does bother me. And so actually, most of my efforts since I've become involved in YouTube and the Great Debate has been sort of trying to help my fellow atheists sort of up their game a little bit, avoid certain bad counter-apologetics, and embracing better counter-apologetics, not shirking the burden of justification for their position, and engaging in moves that I think reflect badly on us. And it wouldn't matter too much for me, even the fact that we sort of share the same labels, it wouldn't bother me too much, except that there's such a stereotype when it comes to atheism. There's the stereotype of the atheist who is angry and rebellious against God and hates the religious and stuff like that. We're all, those of us who are non-believers, we're laboring under this stereotype. And a way to dismantle that stereotype is, at the very least, to not live up to it, to not go around fuming and trash-talking the religious, saying that they're all systematically irrational, that it's a mental illness and things like that, and adopting the any old counter argument will do when it comes to atheism, right? So if you can avoid discrediting this side of the fence, then I think that's wonderful. So most of my own efforts have been very similar to what Anthony is doing. I haven't been doing anything called Street Epistemology. In fact, I'm actually fairly new to this venture. But I have for a number of years now, because of my background in philosophy and my own interest in epistemology, been interested in getting people to be able to recognize a good argument from a bad argument. So my view is the best way to sort of deconvert people, if that's sort of your end game, or at least a part of your objective, is to just get people to reason better. When people reason better, when they think more deeply about how they arrive at their beliefs, when they think of their beliefs as a product of a process, and they recognize that some of these processes, some of these inferential practices are reliable and conduce to the truth, and some are not. When you get people thinking that way, then that has a kind of system-wide effect in their belief system. There's a lot of compartmentalization that goes on. There are people who are exquisitely rational in work and in their social lives, and yet when it comes to the subject of religion or politics or something like that, they might be heavily in the grips of an ideology, and it's as if their reasoning process is offline. And it's not because they're systematically irrational, because they're perfectly rational in every other aspect of their life. It's that we compartmentalize. We simply think that we've got the truth in our back pocket in this domain. We don't need to think very critically about how we arrive at our beliefs. And if you can get people thinking in terms of epistemic responsibilities, you have a responsibility, if only to yourself, never mind any other interlocutors out there, but just to yourself, right? If you're in the business of having a belief at all, thinking something is true, then surely you have a stake in it actually being true. And what are the methods? What are the tried and true methods for arriving at true beliefs? And why are you not applying those when it comes to your religious beliefs or your political beliefs or whatever? So, as I see it, reasoning is something that is a skill. It's acquired, and we sometimes, one of the things that we acquire is a sense of when we need to apply it and when it doesn't matter, when some beliefs are immune to reason. And you can dismantle that. You can get a person in the course of a conversation to recognize that, they're playing a kind of weird game of insulating a certain set of their beliefs from the critical faculties that they would deploy in every other circumstance. And you can show the inconsistency in that. And I think that's what street epistemology does. And that's sort of one of the things that I've been trying to do for a number of years. So a lot of my own project and interests in the great debate line up with street epistemology, because as I see it, street epistemology is about having very, very natural conversations, open-ended conversations, where you try to get a person to recognize that the epistemological standards that they're applying that they normally apply are not being applied in the case of certain very, very deep-seated beliefs to which people feel very emotionally invested and strongly wedded. And if you can get them to realize, hey, wait a minute, shouldn't be doing that, then they will go away and continue thinking about it generally. Not always, but very often they will continue thinking about it. And you can plant a seed that way. And you can. I sort of see reason as a kind of corrosive acid. Reasoning works slowly. You don't usually, in the course of a single conversation, change anybody's mind very, very rapidly. You might get some concessions out of it if you approach them diplomatically. And I think street epistemology, as it's practiced by Anthony here, actually does work that way. I think he in fact manages to get a lot of concessions out of people because of his tact and diplomatic manner and open-endedness. It's a confrontational method, but it's not a combative method. And I think if you can do that, you can sort of find cracks where you can pour in that corrosive acid of good reasoning, where then it continues to act, so that when you're no longer having that conversation with them, they have this sense that, I really ought to be thinking about this differently. I ought to be applying the same epistemological standards to my religious or political beliefs or whatever as I would to any other belief. And I think that's all to the good when that happens.
Is that what you kind of see when you do these essays, Anthony? That you're basically, I don't think faith is a reliable mechanism for truth making. I just don't see that as well.
Not everyone uses faith for their God belief or other beliefs. I have heard people say that they use faith to know that it was a ghost in their kitchen squeaking a cabinet. But sometimes a person's epistemology is I feel that it's true. It's a feeling. I get that from Mormons a lot. But just a couple points I wanted to hit on before we progress. Yeah, I see SE as a tool. So when I have a conversation with somebody, yes, I want to impart that corrosive goo so that it sticks with them and they think about it and marinates on their belief. But I also want to entice them with the conversational tool that they just experienced. I would love it and I've had people express interest, like, what are you doing again? Because that was really fun. I've never had such a great conversation before like that. And I tell them about street epistemology, and then they want to learn it because, like, one guy was going on about how he has a friend who is a Jehovah's Witness who wanted him to switch religions, and he says, I'm going to ask him, how do I know that? How does he know that that's true? And he was really enamored with the method. So this is about imparting a tool set to people, not just questioning a person's belief and planting a seed, but giving them a tool so that they can use this to challenge all sorts of beliefs that they hold and the beliefs of the people around them. Just very quickly on the whole atheist stereotype thing, like when people see videos of atheists having respectful conversations with believers, they're somewhat taken aback. Now, I've been doing this for 5 years, and there are other people uploading content, but there's still not a lot of really cordial conversations going on between the two. Ozzy, I've noticed you a couple of years ago, and I was taken aback when I saw how respectful you were of, talking to the believers. Like, wow, that's really interesting. It was an anomaly. And I think that the more that we engage with believers in a cordial manner and we question their beliefs and we open ourselves up to the same types of questions, that it's going to be harder for theists to dismiss us. It's easy to dismiss an angry atheist. They're just irrational. Why would I want to talk to them? They just want to sin. But if you're willing to have a conversation and you can be polite, it's much harder for somebody to. It's easier to let's say that there's a Christian forum, right? And there's an atheist just leaving all sorts of horrible comments on there. Moderators tend to leave those on there because they want that stereotype. They want that anger to be visible. But if you go to a forum and you have a cordial conversation, I've seen this firsthand, they will often just remove those very cordial, probing conversations because those are the threats. And then just one thing about Ozzy, like, I would love it, Ozzy. We were just talking about this before you joined, but I think you've had a big impact on the atheist community. And I think it would be neat if somebody were to one day like make a video about the challenges that you've posed to atheists and the impact that you've had. But yeah, all in all, like, I think that SE is a really interesting tool set and a really great way of challenging people's beliefs, including my own.
Did you want to address that real quick?
Yeah, I just wanted to add to something that you were saying, Anthony, about not discrediting yourself. But one of the things that goes on in the Great Debate is typically religious people, especially people of the monotheistic faiths, like to think of themselves as living in the kingdom of morality. We own morality. That's our province. Meanwhile, the non-believers out there like to think of themselves as living in the kingdom of reason, right? We're the skeptics. We're the rational ones, right? We're the ones who are the science boosters, and you're all, science denying fundamentalists and stuff like that. But I mean, if you want to be seen as a proponent of skepticism and rationality and scientific values, you have to sort of walk the talk. It's not enough to just say that you're a rational person and all those believers out there are irrational by your lights. You have to appear rational. If you lose your cool every time you're in a discussion with a religious person because they say something that strikes you as just mind-numbingly stupid and ill-informed, if every time you have that experience, right? And we've all had that experience talking to someone, right? Happens both ways, by the way. But if you lose your cool whenever that happens, and you start ranting and raving and name calling, then you don't look like you're from the kingdom of reason. On the contrary, you look like someone who's not self-possessed. You don't look like someone who's capable of dispassionately examining another person's beliefs. So we discredit ourselves when we do this, right? So I think it's important to try to model, whenever possible, good behavior. Now, there are two reasons to do this. Right now, we've been talking about the strategic reason. The strategic reason is, look, don't discredit yourself. Don't look like you are in fact arguing out of a hatred of God and a hatred of the religious or something like that, right? You need to be modeling a more Spock-like demeanor. It doesn't mean that you have to be cold and bloodless or anything like that. I mean, people who see me in discussions know that I try to be polite, but I get heated. I will raise my voice. I'll talk faster. I'll overtalk another person sometimes, right? I lose my cool too. It happens to all of us. But to the extent that one is capable of it, one should be fairly restrained to at least model the kind of epistemological attitude we're trying to recommend. Otherwise, you're involved in a kind of performative contradiction. You're saying this is how we ought to proceed in evaluating beliefs, but then when you confront a belief that just seems like completely off the wall, talk to a flat earther or something like that, or a young earth creationist, and you just can't believe what you're hearing, and you respond with incredulity and insults, you're not modeling the behavior that you're supposed to be recommending. So that's a performative contradiction. And so it's hard for the people that you would like to impress, even an onlooker, to take you seriously. So that's the strategic reason. But then there's another reason. I think there's a deeper moral reason. I try to be polite in my conversations, even when people are insulting me, in part because I just believe in the value of civility. I think that there are norms of rational discourse, but part of the norms of rational discourse are norms of civility, norms of civil discourse. You have to be civil, and that means you have to apply the principle of intellectual charity. You have to try to credit the other person with at least as much intelligence as you have. They might not have as much education. They might not be as knowledgeable in a particular domain, but don't assume that they're stupid, right? Try to assume in an argument that however they arrived at this misbegotten belief as you see it, that they arrived there honestly, okay? And that they're not lying to you, right? They may be in the grips of an ideology, but nevertheless, it's not going to advance your own agenda or talk them out of what they believe by approaching them as if you think that they're stupid and being condescending. And so try not to be condescending. Now, we all do it. We all slip into it. I do it too. But I try not to. And so I think there's a deeper moral reason here. And that is civility is important for me. I mean, there's violence, there's power, and then there's talk, right? And if you're going to sort of make strides in the world and improve the world, talk is the way to go. And as I see it, when you're engaged in civil discourse, it disarms the other person. When you're being civil and they're being uncivil, not only does it look really bad in front to everyone else who's looking, but the other person starts to feel frustrated, right? And they sense the hypocrisy in their own position. And you're not being exposed as a kind of hypocrite engaged in a kind of performative contradiction. So I think just sort of at a deeply moral level, it makes sense to try to be civil in a discussion. Civil discourse and rational discourse is something that sort of, it ups everybody's game. It edifies you, it edifies the other person, it edifies anyone who's an onlooker or a listener. And anyway, well, I'll stop there. There's a bit more to say on that, but that's enough for now.
I think I agree with a lot of that. Yeah, very often when I'm having talks with people, I ask them about their God belief, and they get really agitated. But if I can meet them here and be calm, they usually come down and they meet me at that calm level. If I ratchet it up, they're going to go higher, and I'm going to go higher, and it gets out of control. That being said, I do think that there are a lot of atheists that are justified in being angry. They were likely taught things that were not true. They've suffered a lot of trauma, and I get messages from people all the time that are grateful for having learned SE, but they're still struggling with that anger when they see a person that's holding a belief that they used to hold, or the parents that taught them this are no longer around, so they have nowhere to direct that anger, so they direct it at the next person that shares that same belief that they were taught. And it just so happens I'm days away from releasing a blog post that talks about how to remain calm when you're having these types of discussions. I don't get into so much the benefits of it, like Ozzy just elucidated there. But there are a lot of things that a person can do to try to remain calm, because the benefit of it far outweighs the that little bit of benefit that you might get from raging on somebody. Some people really need it and they need to have that release, but it causes so much damage.
Yeah, and I definitely agree that the polite discourse is mostly the way to go. There's no question about that. But what do you say to the militant atheist types? Because I mean, I got to tell you, as an agnostic, I get flack from both sides. I'm not going to lie. I mean, and I find that most of it comes from the atheist community. And even though I side with the atheist community on pretty much almost everything. I mean, as far as like, science and things of that nature, it's just epistemic reasons why I adhere to agnosticism, purely epistemic reasons. But they will leave the most visceral comments more so than theists. Sometimes they'll just be on this attack. Well, Steve, why, how could you be an atheist? Blah, blah, blah. And just be visceral about it, not just Socratic, but visceral in the way of their attacking my particular position. And of course, they don't want to learn anything new. I mean, I could point out things to them. They don't want to understand anything. They don't bother to even say they care about philosophy, and yet they're engaged in philosophical discussions. They'll say things like, "I don't have beliefs." Weird things to me, right? Because we all have.
Are you giving this from other atheists or theists?
This is actually from the atheist side. So what do you say
Okay.
to the atheist community when they have I understand they have the right to be angry sometimes, no question. Especially young Earth creationists, they obviously were lied to. But
Well, I have some thoughts on that.
yes, please.
I wouldn't just go. I wouldn't just go out and tell people, because if you were to tell them, "Hey, what you're doing is harmful," again, you're going to probably run into that backfire effect. I would engage with them. You can use SE. You can use Socratic questioning on what is their objective. For one thing, their objective may not be the same as yours. They may not give a shit about helping other people. They just want to tear somebody down because they feel better about it, and it helps them at some deeper level. If that's their goal, then that's their goal. But if their goal is to help somebody, usually when a person engages in a debate or an argument with somebody, they're doing so because they want to correct that other person's view of reality. They may just not know that there are better tools at their disposal. And it might just be a matter of modeling the behavior, like Ozzy was talking about earlier, but modeling it for other atheists. Show them a video of an atheist having a cordial conversation with a believer, and that believer being stunned because they've just discovered that they have a faulty foundation for their belief. That could be a real eye-opener for a militant atheist. And again, atheists can be very justified in being angry, but we just have to recognize the fallout from doing so.
I had a thought on angry atheists. A lot of people know that I was a fundamentalist growing up, and I tumbled out of my faith in my, mid to late adolescence. So by the time I was a young adult, I was a self-described atheist, and there was some back and forth there for a while. But by the time I self-identified explicitly as an atheist, I was feeling pretty angry about religion, and so I can sympathize. I remember rather vividly what it was like to be angry at the religious, and I think I have an idea why a lot of atheists are angry, especially those atheists. I'm speaking specifically now of those atheists who were themselves religious and in the grips of something like fundamentalism, as I was. When you shift out of an almost totalizing worldview, right? Whether it's a political ideology or in this case a religious ideology, it's difficult. It's painful. There's a lot at stake, right? Because when I was a fundamentalist. I was a Jehovah's Witness, and that belief system didn't just tell me what was going to happen after I died, what the future was going to hold. It told me how I ought to live day to day. It told me who I should have as friends, who I could have as friends, and who I absolutely could not have as friends, and how I ought to treat people, and what kind of spouse I should seek. And as when I was a teenage boy, I was all as girl crazy as any typical boy was. I had to sort of make discriminations between the kinds of girls that I would pursue and the kinds of girls that I would not pursue, and stuff like that. It affected every aspect of my life. Okay. So when I gave up that religious outlook, everything seemed to have to go with it. Everything that I thought was true, all of my values were at stake. Okay, so it was extremely consequential. Okay, it wasn't something as abstract as, do we live on an old Earth or a young Earth? It was nothing. I mean, that was inconsequential compared to these other questions. And so as the confidence in my faith was crumbling beneath me, I was struggling to hang on to it. And I was engaging in apologetics. Okay, now I was a young man, and there was no internet at the time. It was rather difficult to find apologetical sources and stuff like that. So I wasn't, a very serious apologist by any stretch. But I was engaged in my own private effort at apologetics, at shoring up the belief system that I had embraced and to which I was firmly wedded, but which I was now increasingly finding dubious. And so there comes a point when you start falling out of your faith like this, where you are no longer arguing honestly for your faith. There comes a point where you're about to give it up. And that can be fairly prolonged, a period where you don't actually believe the justifications coming out of your own mouth. You are now professing to believe things that you no longer feel very confident in, and you're not even confident of the apologetics that you're putting forward, right? But I mean, it's kind of like clinging by your fingernails, okay? That can go on for a long time. For some people, if you've been religious your whole life, or much of your life as an adult, and you raised your children in a religion and stuff like that, and then you lose your faith, that period of hanging on for dear life can go on for years, right? When you finally let go, you're going to look back at that with some embarrassment. You're going to be a little bit ashamed of yourself, right? It might not even occur to you that you are ashamed of yourself, but you're going to be a little embarrassed at what you used to believe and how badly you argued and in what bad faith you argued. That you are arguing for something in bad conscience. And I think what happens with a lot of atheists, one of the things that informs their anger, that motivates their anger, is that they remember very well putting forward arguments insincerely, dishonestly, as they were tumbling out in the final stages. And what I think happens is a lot of us then project that onto everyone who is putting forward those apologetical moves, and we think they too must be arguing in bad faith, that they don't believe those apologetics, right? That they know those aren't the reasons why they believe, and they know darn well that they're not convincing and no one should believe, right? Why do they think that? Because they know that they themselves went through that. But that is a mistake. It is a mistake. That is projection. That's a fundamental attribution error there. You're assuming that the people who are putting out the same kinds of arguments that you were putting out are motivated exactly as you were, that they're at the same kind of stage as you are, and that they don't believe the words coming out of their mouths. Look, there are apologists out there who I am confident do not believe the apologetics they're putting out. But there's a lot of people out there who are apologists or who are just sitting in church pews repeating the apologetics of professional apologists, and they sincerely believe it, right? Just because I wasn't believing it when I was saying it doesn't mean that they're all being dishonest. And so what ends up happening is a lot of atheists are angry because they remember all too well the bullshit that they were believing in or professing to believe in, that they didn't really believe in, and that they were being disingenuous when they were putting this forward. And then they project that onto everybody. And that, I think, is uncharitable and simply mistaken, right? And that, I think, explains not just a lot of the anger that people feel that they got duped and stuff like that they were lied to when they might have merely been misinformed by people who sincerely believed what they passed along to them. But they feel that the people are actively lying all the time when they put forward their apologetics. And so this contributes not just to anger at the religion, but it contributes to a feeling of contempt and disrespect towards the religious. They have to know that they're lying, right? And I hear some people say that. Aaron Ra, for instance, he often talks about apologists as liars. And many of them are, but I don't think that most of them are. I think the minority of them are lying. And I think a lot of that is projection. We remember what it was like, and we project it on. And why wouldn't we remember it that way? It's the last experience we had as atheists before we tumbled out of our faith. We remember vividly, dishonestly professing things and putting forward arguments disingenuously. And then I think we sort of then project that onto everyone. So that I think is a mistake. And if we could sort of rid ourselves of that tendency of feeling disrespect and contempt for the religious when they put forward apologetics that seem to us hilarious, it would go a long way to being more charitable and advancing the agenda that you have.
But I don't think a lot of theists put forth arguments disingenuously. I don't think a lot of them are dishonest. I obviously can probably point to many of them which I do think are dishonest, but I think the vast majority don't. And I don't think Anthony may know this, but I know you do, Ozzy. But my upbringing wasn't really religious, but I joined the Mormon Church when I was 17. So I was never really that active, but I did the apologetics for several years, even in the Navy. A couple of people actually joined the church, but later on. And I would say in pretty much only the last 4 or 5 years, I've had to look at the beliefs. I had to look and see, am I compartmentalizing? I see problems that exist in the archaeology of the Book of Mormon. I see problems in the church itself engaging in stepping into politics, saying, we're going to donate money for propositions against gay marriage. Bishops asking 12-year-olds about their masturbation, things that they do. And I'm abhorred by this. I'm like, this should never happen. This is as bad to me as the Catholic scandals of you don't ask a 12-year-old if they masturbate. I don't think a bishop has any right to do that. And these things that I found out about the LDS Church, and there's a thing called Evergreen, which was a reparative therapy, what's it called? Reparative therapy, where they try to take people that are gay and supposedly make them straight using unapproved, tested types of means, which again, don't work. I mean, if you look at the data, none of these people have ever changed their sexuality. I don't think that people change from being, I'm going to be gay one day and not gay the next day. It doesn't work that way. And so I had to look at it as a whole and say, if these are the practices of the LDS Church, it is something that I still want to be associated with, right? So, I mean, I don't longer consider myself to be Mormon, even though I'm technically on the what do they call the list, the doles, the rolls. But I had to do that myself. And even though I have a lot of respect for the LDS, I think the LDS are great people. That's what bothers me when people attack the people of the LDS Church. I've known LDS that I grew up with. They are some of the most warm, generous, greatest people I've ever met in my entire life. But I have to question the theology of it, because even though there's a lot about LDS theology, I actually kind of think it's pretty cool. The bigger picture is I can't compartmentalize. I have to apply the same standard I do towards young earth creationists or anything else toward the LDS theology as well. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. After having all these conversations with people, and I just met Mormons about 3 weeks ago on the trail. Wonderful couple. And the more conversations that I have with believers, and especially when I'm using SE, I definitely can separate the belief from the person and even ask questions in a way that encourages them to do so. Like, stand over here and let's look at your belief together. And I can see people as people, and they're just holding these beliefs that they formed, maybe because they were never given the tools to critically think, or they were raised with this belief and they've never questioned it whatsoever. They've never considered what there is to back up this belief or what would change their mind. And I have such a sympathy now for believers. And I don't mean that in a condescending way. It's a lot of people think, you're pitying them or something, but I could very easily see in fact, I may even have beliefs right now that I'm absolutely sure are true that may not be. And that's a very humbling thing. In fact, I think it's a liberating thing when you realize that we're all walking around with these beliefs that may not be true. And then once you start to recognize that this is a human design flaw, possibly, that this is just something that human brains do. Okay, don't freak out on the word design, but this is just something I think human brains do. We're all susceptible to it. And once you recognize that, I have a tremendous amount more respect for people who hold these beliefs. And it takes a lot these days to trigger me when I talk to an arrogant apologist, for example, because I'm giving them the benefit of the doubt that if I was raised in a very similar way and exposed to these ideas, I could very well be in that person's shoes.
Yeah, I like the fact that you brought up that word design. This is discussions that we've had in the past here that I've actually said. I find it kind of, it rubs me the wrong way when I see atheists avoid certain words. They seem to want to avoid words like faith, belief, and design. And I'm like, why? Take these words back. These words have meanings to them.
Just like community or morality. Yeah,
exactly.
Religions don't have a lock on these things, but you do have to be sensitive to how people can take a word like that and run and say, Anthony, there's probably even comments about it right now about how I use the word design. So you do have to be careful about words. Words, people can take them and run with them. So that's why I was so quick to clarify at the start.
But absolutely.
But yeah,
by using it though,
okay
and using it
words
contextually the way you did and explaining it, there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, I believe that things are designed, even biologically designed, but that doesn't imply a teleological explanation. You can have a perfectly teleologic situation where things are designed by nature, or apparently designed, at least have the appearance of it. But I don't have a problem with that word design, and I think that the ID movement have kind of hijacked it to mean a very specific thing, right? They want ID. They want the word design and ID to mean very specifically something designed by a disembodied type of intelligence, correct? And I think that I could use that word differently just as well, and not have to be wary of using that word in general parlance and have somebody pop up and say, oh look, Steve thinks everything's designed, he must be an ideist.
Mm-hmm. Ozzy said something earlier, I think, and correct me if I'm mistaken, but I think you said, Ozzy, that you don't think that apologists are lying, that many of them actually do believe it. And if that's the case, I wanted to get your sense on whether you think that your typical apologist is questioning or doubting more than they let on.
Well, my hunch is with some that they are, because some of their efforts seem a little desperate. But let's distinguish between apologists' sincerity with respect to their doctrines and their apologetics, right? All of us have things that we believe to be true, and then we have arguments that we put forth in defense of those things that we think are true. And very often, the thing that we think is true, let's say you have a moral conviction or a political conviction, and you might genuinely, in fact, very strongly affirm that position, but you might also be putting forward arguments in support of that position, which I'm a little bit weak. I don't know how convinced I am of that, but I'll put it forward anyway. So I think that it's irrelevant. The point is they might not accept it, even though it's part of what they're supposed to accept. So there'll be things that they actually sincerely believe as part of their faith, that are part of the Catholic doctrine. And then there will be other things that they are supposed to profess that they don't in fact profess. They just don't think are true. Actually merely profess them. Sometimes the people will nod along and go, well, yeah, if that's part of the faith, then I guess I got to believe it. And they don't actually believe it. They're confessing right then and there that they don't believe it. They're confessing, I must profess to believe it. I don't believe it, but I must profess to believe it. Okay. So those are things, think of those as sort of first order beliefs about the faith. Okay. But then there are all the reasons, the justifications that you might give for those things, whether you genuinely believe them or profess to believe them, right? Or merely profess to believe them, right? There are apologetics. And now some of the apologetics you might find convincing, and some of them you might not. For instance, I think that a lot of theists genuinely believe that the world is a creation. It's an art created by an intelligent mind, okay? And one of the reasons that they think it's true is they find the cosmological argument compelling. Look, it couldn't have just happened. Something had to start it. It couldn't have gone on and on and on backwards into infinity. The universe appears to have some kind of beginning, they think, from physics. Therefore, something had to sort of touch off this Big Bang, right? And it couldn't have been in the universe because then it would be part of the universe. So if we're talking about the beginning of the universe and the beginning of time, there had to have been some kind of maternity and something that could cause it. So they find the cosmological argument convincing. And then they might also find something like a teleological argument convincing, an argument from design. There's all this order and perfection and beauty and harmony and regularity and patternicity. This can't have just happened as they see it by some undirected process. So they find a design or teleological argument compelling. they might not be very committed to the particular design argument that they're putting forward, that they've heard somewhere, that they're just repeating. They might not have a lot of confidence in that specific formulation of the argument, but they think that something like that has got to be right. There's something fundamentally right about this argument, right? And they can't shake it. So are they being disingenuous? Well, I think they're being quite genuine when they say that they see the world as designed and then must have a designer, an intelligent designer. I think they're sincere when they say that. But very often when they put forward a particular formulation, they can be convinced by it, right? But then there will be others who will be convinced by it. They'll think, hey, you know what? This formula of the, Paley watch argument or something, that analogy, they might find that completely convincing, absolutely straightforward. It ought to be rationally compelling to anyone who hears it. And they're baffled why someone like me isn't impressed with it. Right? So, apologists, do I think that sometimes they have doubts? Yeah, I think a lot of them have misgivings, but it doesn't mean that they actually question their faith. And it doesn't mean that they question that the line of argument is more or less right. I think that they often have a lot of questions about the specifics, the formulation of the argument. Right? For instance, like Craig believes in the doctrines of his faith, and I think he believes very sincerely that the cosmological argument is a good one. I don't know how convinced he is that his own formulation of the cosmological argument is a good one. I think that when he starts talking about, the cause must be, spaceless and so forth, I think he's got to know, given the state of his education, that, and this is the best formulation that he can come up with. Is he completely convinced that it's right? I doubt it. I doubt it very much. So, but that's not. You can't sort of say, well, look, if he's not completely convinced by it, he shouldn't be putting it forward. Look, I have political positions that I hold, and I feel them very strongly. I think they're true. I think they're absolutely true. They strike me as manifestly true sometimes. And then I will put forward reasons and arguments. I'll talk about statistics. I'll invoke economic principles and stuff like that in support of some of my political beliefs, right? And I'm nowhere near as confident of the reasons for my belief as I am for the belief itself, right? There's a disconnect between my level of confidence and in my belief and the level of confidence in the arguments for the very belief, right? Mm-hmm. That shouldn't happen. A perfectly rational agent wouldn't do that. Your confidence would get scaled down. Confidence in the arguments for that belief are not so high.
Hey, Ozzy, real
right?
quick.
What you want.
If I can interrupt, we have a lot of buffering. I'm just going to take 3 seconds to restart the feed real quick. If you just pause for just 1 second, it's going to take me literally 4 seconds to restart. I'm just going to change the bit rate down, but I have to stop it.
Yeah, I just want to finish that cross the T's and dot the I's there. So when Anthony, when you say, do I think that these apologists have doubts and are not fully confident of their apologetics, that they might be merely professing them? Yeah, I think that's true. But I don't think anybody escapes that. I think all of us in our moral convictions, for instance, and our political convictions are completely guilty of that. So I'm not surprised when an apologist talking about these grand metaphysical claims about God and the nature of the universe and reality, that they're engaged in that too. I know I'm engaged in that when I engage in moral philosophy, when I engage in in political discourse. I know very often my own confidence in the arguments for my moral and political positions does not scale with the confidence that I have in propositions themselves. It shouldn't be, but that's how it is. So if you bear that in mind, you can be a lot more charitable when you encounter an apologist who's putting forward an argument that you think, nah, there's no way he can be convinced by that.
So your response reminds me of something that a lot of people who are using SE will do, where we ask a person what they believe. They say, I believe in a God. We ask them for a couple of justifications. Can you tell me why? What is your main justification? And then they might profess to say, I was involved in a rollover accident and I survived it. And then before we spend an hour talking about statistics, we might just ask them, if you surviving a rollover accident could be explained to your satisfaction, that statistically, that it, with a person who is driving in your area with this type of car with a seatbelt on, it's quite common to survive these things. Would you still believe in the God with just as much confidence? And they would say, yes, of course, I still believe it's based on faith or something. So it's a really handy rhetorical tool just by asking a question to determine, does that justification have any bearing whatsoever on your confidence in this belief? And if they say no, I would still be just as confident, then there must be something else propping up that belief. And I think when you were giving your response, you reminded me of that as something that we do often, where it helps us isolate what is driving that belief, what is driving their confidence in that belief. And sometimes we have to repeat that 3 or 4 times where we finally get down to that lower level, which tends to be, well, here's the evidence for it, which it's almost not when it comes to a God, or I'm taking it on faith.
What level of confidence do you think is acceptable for a belief? I mean, obviously, at a certain point, people are going to call it knowledge, right? I mean, the greater degree of confidence is a differentiation between what we would consider to be belief as opposed to what we consider to be knowledge, even though I see a lot of people lately think that knowledge means epistemic certainty. And I'm kind of confused where they seem to derive that from. That they think to say that they know something, they have to be absolutely certainty in some kind of Cartesian certainty sense. And I don't know why that's
again, you have to remember that the people that I'm running into very rarely have given a lot of thought to these types of questions. Okay. They don't know these academic differences between knowledge and belief, and what in knowledge is justified true belief, and all this stuff. They're giving and Ozzy and I are trying to set up another conversation, perhaps with Matt Dillahunty and Blake June, to get into this idea of the belief scale. But generally, people are able to kind of get a sense of how sure they are that something is true, and they can probably throw it on a scale. Sometimes people aren't comfortable with it, and they're like, "Oh, just put down. I'm very confident. I don't want to give you a number. That's silly. Why would I want to do that?" But generally, people profess a fairly high degree of confidence in their belief that a God exists. Sometimes they say, I'm like at 30%. And then it can get really interesting. Okay, well, why aren't you at 100? What was the thing that brought you down to a 30? So, yeah, it's not a perfect system.
It's hard to quantify it, right?
It is, yeah, it's hard to quantify, but at least just asking somebody how sure they are that something is true can be a profound question for a person that's never considered that their belief may not be true. Just to like think, yeah, well, how sure am I that that's true? That in itself can get the wheels turning, and we haven't even asked difficult questions yet.
Yeah, that's interesting. When I was a believer, I remember I didn't feel confident. To say that I felt, if you'd asked me how confident are you, Ozzy, that Jehovah exists, I might have been a little bit dumbfounded by the question, and how confident am I? And it wasn't because confidence almost doesn't characterize what I felt. I had never doubted it, right? I had never doubted it. I had grown up in a family where this was just, Jehovah was as real as trees and clouds, right? Sure, he wasn't as evident, as obvious he wasn't an object to be met with in space, right? But that wasn't a problem, because given the kind of thing that Jehovah is, it wasn't problematic that I didn't see the sort of material evidence of him in the world or anything like that, right? So it wasn't even that I felt confident. What I felt was almost beyond confidence. It was like I never doubted it. And so if you'd asked me, "What, you never doubted? You're 100% certain?" I think what I would have had to have said is, "Yeah, well, I guess I am." I never thought of it in those days. I never thought of it in terms of a scale of confidence. Like very often when you ask somebody, how confident are you of something, it's because there is something that warrants a doubt, something that motivates a person to have some doubts. If you ask me, how confident are you, that the Blue Jays will win the next baseball game or something like that, or how confident are you that your car is not going to break down or something like that, right? I have reasons, why I think whatever it is I think about that. But there are also reasons that would motivate a doubt. Well, I know that cars break down, and I've had a car break down on me in the past, right? And I know the record of the Blue Jays or whatever team or something like that, right? So there would be reasons for me to think that maybe it's not true, or that maybe things will work out a certain way rather than another way. In the case of Jehovah, I had been so sheltered, so insulated by my upbringing, that I really didn't have, until fairly late in the game, until my mid-teens, really, I didn't really have any good reason to question it. Right? So the suggestion that there was something to doubt seemed bizarre. It would be like, Ozzy, do you doubt that you have hands? What? Why on earth would I there's nothing to motivate the doubt that I have hands.
I see.
And then if you said something, well, maybe you're dreaming. What the heck?
The question would have just seemed insane to you, or just inconsistent.
Would that have
with
been the case thousands
reality.
of years ago? Most people were generally theists, right? It would have been almost incomprehensible just for somebody to say, I believe there are no gods. I believe that Jehovah doesn't exist, right? I mean, what would that person be thought of back then 2,000 years ago? Because that was definitely not the norm, correct?
Yeah, you could have been thought of as completely deranged, right? So that's one of the liabilities I see with the idea of a scale, right? Is that for most people, I think most people have entertained, especially by the time they reach adulthood, they have entertained some serious doubts about some part of their religion, and they will probably have encountered someone's incredulity about the existence of their God, and they will have had a conversation about it. And so, yes, they can understand someone having doubts, and they can understand themselves having doubts about it, because something that someone might have said might have given rise to some doubts, right? But in my case, at a certain age, there was nothing like that, right? I mean,
You were in deep.
And you can imagine, I was young, I lived in a rural community, I was like, it was pretty backwards.
It's interesting though. I met a guy, he was in his 80s, and he said, I asked him that same question, he believed in a God, how sure are you from 0 to 100? And he was so stunned. He said, nobody's ever asked me why I think that this belief is true and why I am so sure that it's true. And I felt kind of bad for him. And I ended up uploading the video and using it as an example for the theists who might be watching that are far younger than he, and asking them, do you want to be 80 years old and never have questioned what you're believing to see if it's true? And it was a little discouraging to run into somebody like that, but it ended up kind of working out to be sort of a teaching moment. I think if I had run into Ozzy and he would have said, I've never contemplated even being mistaken on this belief, I would probably ask something along the lines of maybe something like, how did you determine that this thing is really true? Probably recognizing that he's having difficulty answering this question. And I wouldn't just harp on a certainty and say, well, no, you need to give me a number. I mean, we can skip past that. It would be evident that he really, really believes that it's true. And then we can shift to his justifications. Have you ever considered that you might be mistaken? What do you think of people who believe in completely different gods? How could do you think that they may be just as confident that their belief is true? And sometimes that's enough to kind of pry open the cracks a little bit and kind of peek around and see what's down there.
Yeah, I see a lot of people come to the community every so often that have an isolated background. They were raised a specific way, raised to have a specific belief, and then they read some web page or they get a hold of something and then they jump right into it. And of course, being around for a while, we've seen pretty much everything. I don't think there's that much new under the sun as far as argumentations when it comes to God or not God, but they get exposed real quickly to facts that they may have never been experienced before. I actually had people that even younger creationists said, no, I've never heard of that. Oh, I'm not familiar with that. They again learn something they think is a defeater for old Earth creationism, or I should say more theistic evolution, or just evolution in general, and then they learn something. This has happened, but they have to be exposed to these things to begin with, and that's what I think was great about the Great Debate community is that, and even Street Epistemology, is that they're getting exposed to things that maybe they have never been exposed to before. The ability to think, the ability to reason, the questioning of what isn't a justification. I don't think the average person on the street, and you can answer this question, Anthony, but do you think the average person on the street even knows what a justificatory thing is? Do they know what that even means? I don't think they're required to by any means. But
no, I don't think
it is
so.
cool when they learn something about that and go, yeah, maybe my beliefs do need to have reasons, right?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes people get a little lost in in the belief, or they may become more defensive because it's a cherished, deeply held belief that's tied to their identity, like a God existing. And if you feel like they're getting overwhelmed by the subject, you can change it. I heard a recent example that I thought was great. You can just ask your interlocutor if they are willing to accept my claim that I have a Lamborghini and that I drove to the park in the Lamborghini and it's in the parking lot. And you can just take them through this exercise of, well, what would it take for you to be convinced that I had a Lamborghini sitting in the parking lot? And you can just have a nice, friendly chat about what they would accept. Would they just take me on my word? Would they need to see a picture of it maybe? Could I just hold up the keychain? Would that be good enough? Or would we actually need to walk out to the parking lot and me show you one? Would that still be enough to convince you that that one is my Lamborghini? So again, this kind of all keeps coming back to tools that we want to, of course, question people's beliefs and challenge them gently on how they could be so sure. But some people aren't ready for that. You need to maybe even go to a deeper level to teach them how they probably use these methods in their own daily lives. They're not gullible, probably generally. They probably question. If somebody knocked on their door and wanted to sell them something, they'd probably be a little suspicious, a little skeptical. So they're already using this already to some degree, but for some reason, when it comes to some of these more important beliefs, some of these beliefs that are tied to a person's identity, they're selective, and they cordon those beliefs off. And this is sort of these talks, I think, encourage people to know. Go ahead and question those beliefs, question these things that you really think are true, and impart those tools to them so that they can do it on their own.
Real quick, I usually try to keep my hangouts down to like 90 minutes or so. It gets kind of tiresome for the guest and things like that. At least to 90 minutes to maybe 2 hours at most. If you don't mind, can we address some things from the live chat if they want to ask some questions real quick? Because I want to kind of get that in, and some of the things maybe I asked you prior to the hangout about some of the criticisms that I've read about SE, and I think honestly most of them are unjustified. Not going to front. I think that one of the things that I saw levied against Street Epistemology that I'd like to get your opinion on, that they were saying that this is an atheist way of saying they have a rational way to coming to truth, a reliable mechanism to coming to truth, and and they're saying that with surety. And what's your take on that? Would SV be something that you say is a surefire way to come to truth, or is this a way to get people to recognize that maybe their method isn't as surefire as they think?
Okay, that's a good question. So my knee-jerk reaction would be to say that when I'm engaging with somebody, I'm questioning how they're so sure, and then they come to realize that the methods that they're using are not reliable. But I don't then say, okay, now that we've completely destroyed your foundation, or now you recognize how destroyed your foundation for believing in this thing is here's the truth. All right, here's the exact way that you go about figuring out the truth. We don't go that far. However, I do think the act of asking these questions is a good way to arrive at a truth. So there's probably a little bit to that where I'm engaging in these discussions because I personally think that they seem to be a really good way of sussing out what's true or not. It's the questioning, it's the act of going through and questioning these things that I think is a great way to get to a truth. Is it the best way? I don't know. I would love someone to SE me on sort of the SE that we're using to see if it's beneficial.
That would be an interesting exercise, actually.
Yeah, we actually have had people SE while you're doing SE, and how do you know that this is beneficial? Well, how did you come to conclude that this is actually helping people and not hurting people? We've actually had those conversations. There's a couple of Facebook groups. One of them has almost 4,500 members. Just search for Facebook, and you can join, and you can engage in those types of discussions. They're pretty good.
What would be a metric by which to measure the success?
Down to it. This is why we have theists that say, well, I'm going to go out and do SE as well. And I made a tweet the other day, I'm dying to see that, because I think it would become apparent when the questioning stops and when the worldview sharing begins.
Well, they already have presuppositional argumentation, but what would be the metric you'd say would be what you would measure success of SE? I mean, obviously, the measurement of success is by what your end goal would be. If you set forth a certain end goal and you say, this is what I want the metric to comport to say, okay, if I have this many people that do this, then I can measure it as success. What do you want that success to be? Do you just want them to question
Wow.
their beliefs, or do you want them to actually relinquish their beliefs in lieu of some other type of what you would consider to be more better beliefs that what you would think comport with reality?
Damn, that's a great question. So for some people, a success might be having a conversation, getting an I don't know out of a person, and then ending it on good terms where they might want to meet with you again. That could be a success to people. For others, it might be the complete recognition and abandonment of an unreliable belief within a year after X number of conversations. Like that might be a goal for somebody else. For somebody else, it might be somebody backing off on 100% certainty, right? Like recognizing, you know what? Yeah, I really can't know that that's true, but I have a strong belief that that's true. That might be a success. I don't know what a success is, but this is something that needs to be discussed and it needs to be studied. Right now with SE, I think we're in this this phase of promoting it and practicing it and seeing what, throwing everything at the wall and seeing what sticks and what works. And it's a muddled mix of motivational interviewing and psychology and philosophy, and we're getting all this feedback from people. But what we need to get to at some point is some backing where we can have people doing a 1,000-person study or a 10,000-person computer-based study on a safe topic like karma, and ask up to 20 questions, and then you do some sort of long-term study for the next 10 years with those folks, and you see if they've moved one way or the other on their confidence or their certainty that a belief is true. That's an awesome question, and I could probably spend an hour talking about it.
Well, I think perhaps maybe, if I may, real quick, you might just base upon what a success should be as something that was not a failure. You had a video before where you had shown what a failure looks like with the street feature, and so maybe a success is
Right.
something that's just not a failure in that regard. And if you want to like mention that
Yeah.
real quick, about that scenario.
Yeah. So when I first started off doing this, I would argue with people. I have videos where I'm going out to do street epistemology as I was thinking that it was, and I was still falling back to my angry atheist aggressive ways. And I might start off really nice and cordial, but 3 questions in, they drop something about they radiocarbon dated a snail, and it was 4 million years old, and here it's this living thing. And then I slip back to my old ways. So yeah, maybe a success is adhering to strict SE where you resist the temptation to offer counter apologetics. That might possibly be a success. So
because the counter apologetics might lead to that backfire effect, right?
Are far more along the way with regards to this technique. And I think what a success is going to vary in some people's minds. Like I said, a complete abandonment of a belief. Like I met a guy 2 years ago. We met in a college university. He was 100% sure that confident that his belief was true. And he reached out to me almost 2 years later to say that conversation got him on a path to questioning further, to the point where he eventually abandoned his belief. And I have lots of examples like that, not just God beliefs, but other beliefs. Is that a success? I don't know. I mean, we need to address what those things are and then come up with ways to measure it. And I'm not even suggesting that I should be a part of that. I think this probably needs to be even independently looked at from the practitioners of it.
Did you want to add something, Ozzy?
Yeah. Quite apart from sort of measuring success, I think I'll tell you one of the things I like best about street epistemology. Quite apart from the civility of it, the way I see it practiced by a lot of people, especially Anthony, which I think is admirable. One of the things I like about it is it is a proper approach to the recommendation of skepticism. I've often said, listen, I'm not an atheist activist. I'm an outspoken atheist, but I'm not an atheist activist. I'm not agitating to get people to become atheists, right? What I am is a proponent of skepticism and critical thinking and the embracing of scientific values. That, I think, should be the goal. and I think that as a result of that, a byproduct of that will be people tending to abandon dogmatism and superstition and irrationality and moving in the direction of atheism. But I don't try to get people to affirm that gods don't exist. I think it's enough if we can get people being skeptical. But here's what I think is interesting. Throughout this, and watching Anthony's videos, there's an emphasis on questioning, and I think that's the right spirit. The way to properly understand skepticism is that it's not about doubt. A lot of people think that doubt is what it's all about. You've got to get people to doubt. Doubt is a virtue. Doubt's not a virtue. Doubt is a feeling. Certainty is a feeling. And feeling certain about something, that's not any metric of knowledge or truth. You can feel certain about things that are just false. And you can doubt things that are true. And feeling certain about something isn't an accomplishment, right? We often feel certain about things precisely because we're ignorant about a subject. And some feeling bubbles up, and we feel very confident about it, okay? So certainty isn't a measure of truth. It's unconnected to knowledge and veracity. It's just your subjective assessment of the likelihood that something is true. You can be supremely confident. We tend to call that certainty. Doubt is something that is equally effortless. If you tell me that someone stole my car, I go, what? What do you mean? It was just in my driveway, right? But if you tell me that Godzilla just crushed my car, I'm going to think you're joking. And if you tell me a plane just crashed and wiped out my car, and I didn't hear a thunderous crash, I'm going to go, no, that's not true. You're wrong, or something like that. If you tell me that someone I was just talking to 10 minutes ago has died, I'm probably going to call it into question. Because I was just talking to them, and chances are nothing terrible happened to them in the last 10 minutes, right? In other words, I have reasons for doubting, right? The doubts just bubble up in me. Doubt is a feeling, okay? You don't have to try to doubt anything. And it's not a good idea to try to doubt something any more than it's a good idea to try to believe something or be confident about something. Skepticism isn't about doubt. Skepticism is about interrogation. It's about questioning. And one of the things I like best about street epistemology is the emphasis on questioning, on interrogation, on getting people to ask questions. That has the effect of raising doubts. It can also have the effect of raising a person's confidence, right? But I don't hear of anybody recommending that you doubt this and you doubt that and trying to directly shake a person's beliefs. The idea is, no, we're just going to get a person in the habit of mind of thinking about the connection between what they believe and why they believe it. Okay, and that's just all that is getting a person to question, not doubt, but get them to question why they believe. And as soon as that happens, if there's not a good connection between what they believe and why they believe it, doubts will bubble up. Doubts sort of emerge naturally, just like confidence emerges rationally. Because just as easily as if you say, why do you believe? And they never really thought about it, but then they think of some excellent reasons why they believe it's true, then their confidence will grow. Their estimation of the truth of that proposition is going to grow. So confidence and doubt are both feelings. They're not measures of anything. There's no virtue in doubting anything. You need reasons to doubt just like you need reasons to be confident.
But do you think doubt is voluntary or involuntary?
It's involuntary. It just happens to you.
Just like beliefs.
Just like, yeah, exactly. But questioning, that is an act. That is a decision. You can say, you know what? I want to question things. And I get sort of pushback from people sometimes who self-identify as skeptics and critical thinkers when I put forward certain chestnut philosophical problems like Hume's problem of induction or something like that, or how do you know you're not a brain in a vat or something like that, or how do you know there are other minds and things like that, and that solipsism isn't true. And people think it's just some kind of game. But the point is this. These are all beliefs that we have, that there's a mind-independent reality, that there are other minds out there, that the future will resemble the past in relevant respects, right? We don't question these things. We should question these things. That doesn't mean you have to doubt them, okay? But the confidence that we feel is kind of weird, given that most of us have never thought about these things. And so have no good justification or reason, right? Surely there's nothing wrong with calling them into question. If you want to sort of think of yourself as a good skeptic and a critical thinker, if there's one thing you should do, it's question the things you never doubt, the things that you think are beyond doubting. unworthy of doubting. That's precisely what a skeptic and a critical thinker thinks about and doubts and questions and interrogates, right? And then doubts will either arise or they won't. But don't make the mistake of thinking that skepticism is doubting, because then what will happen is you'll look at street epistemology and you'll think that, oh well, Anthony is being a good skeptic to the extent that he's trying to get people to doubt things. Look, it's not about getting people to doubt things. It's about getting them to question things. And the rest, just doubting and confidence, that happens as a byproduct. You don't have to try to instill doubt. You just have to get people to question. That's what skepticism is. Skepticism and critical thinking is about interrogation, right? It's not about trying to engender doubt or actively trying to doubt. I can't muster a doubt. I don't have that power. I can't muster confidence in myself in something I don't think is true. I doubt things effortlessly when they strike me as wrong. If I believe something to be true and you present me a fact that contradicts it, the first thing I'm going to do is doubt your evidence.
Yeah, before you came in, we were kind of talking about this. This is why, exactly, if Anthony remembers, I was hesitant to use the word doubt for that very reason, because I find that people who claim to be skeptics use the word doubt differently than I use it. And I didn't want to. I say I know Anthony thinks that street epistemology is to impart doubt, but I have the same concerns on that you just enunciated for that same reason, because I don't think doubt is something we voluntarily come to either. And so I think that, like you said, for skepticism to me is a methodology for determining truth value. It's a methodology to say, do we have reasons to believe these things? Are we justified? But I don't think that we should necessarily just use skepticism on things that we doubt. I think, again, I apply skepticism across the board. Is my foundational position from foundationalism legit? Do I have reasons to be a foundationalist by something else? I do these things all the time when they get brought up.
I want to throw in a caveat there. I don't want anyone to construe what I just said as something that Anthony would affirm. I don't know how he feels about what I just said. In fact, he might disagree. He might say, no, I am explicitly trying to raise doubts. But I think that is a misbegotten way of characterizing the project. And when I watch what you do in your videos, you're getting people to examine the connection between what they believe and why they believe it, if there's anything there. Okay, that's skepticism. That's critical thinking. That's interrogation. That's questioning, right? That very often has the effect of raising doubts, especially on subjects where you have good reason to think they probably don't have any good connection there. But I think people are entirely too focused on trying to raise doubts, and they valorize doubt. They think doubt is a virtue. Doubt is not a virtue. It's just a feeling. It's a byproduct, right? If by doubting you mean questioning, that's fine. I think questioning and interrogation is an epistemological and cognitive virtue.
So this is a really good discussion, and I'm loving this, because on my Twitter bio, I think it says imparting the gift of doubt. So as you've characterized my position or your position, I do think that, I guess I agree that doubt is a feeling. And I guess this is awesome, because doubt is such a scary word for people. If you frame it and you say, have you ever doubted? That's far scarier to ask than, have you ever questioned? Questioning,
right. Oh yeah,
questioning,
absolutely.
Great. I question all the time. I question my kids. I question my doctor. I question myself sometimes. But doubt, ooh, that's scary. So you've definitely given me something to think about here. And as we're talking, before we got into this little thing, we were talking about the goal of street epistemology, or what is a success? And maybe the success here is openness, because if a person is open, if they're more open to the idea of being mistaken, then they will start asking themselves these questions, and perhaps doubt is the outcome of openness. So yeah, maybe I am mischaracterizing this by saying that the idea here is to impart doubt.
But anybody who's been in the military
and maybe that's just the outcome of what we're actually doing. I love this, because I've been plugging away at this for 5 years, and this is the type of dialogue that helps me grow and get better at this method and better understand what it is we're doing.
Well, that's what I meant when I said this is what I think you're doing.
I had the volume turned down. Sorry.
Sorry. This is what I meant when I said this is what I see you doing.
Yeah.
And while you might be talking a lot of talk about doubt, what I see you doing is interrogating and questioning and getting people to see the value of interrogating and questioning things
Which
that
then
they
can lead to
don't
doubt.
even doubt.
Yeah.
Where there is no doubt, you can still question. Indeed, I would submit that one of the smartest things you can do is to question precisely where you have no doubts.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, that is what you want to do. That is a critical thinker.
And
right?
Anthony, if I can make the distinction real quick, in the military, you have to make decisions, right? And you have to make sometimes quick snap decisions. Also, I had background in management. You have to make decisions. You have to question your decisions, but that doesn't mean you necessarily doubt them, right? They're not synonymous terms in that regard, right? You always you're always revising your position to say, am I making the correct decision, by asking yourself questions pertinent to the outcome that you want to achieve. That doesn't necessarily translate to doubt, in my opinion. Does that make sense? Does that make sense to you, Ozzy? Was that in a way?
No, absolutely. I mean, remember, you can question things that you don't doubt, and I submit that you sort of have an epistemological responsibility, if you're going to self-identify as a critical thinker and a skeptic, to question and interrogate precisely where you don't have doubts. Anybody can question when they have something when they have doubts about it. Everyone does. You don't need skepticism and critical thinking when you have doubts. You're going to be an ace critical thinker and skeptic when something strikes you as bullshit, right? As soon as someone says something to you that strikes you as false, spotting flaws and fallacies is so easy. Everything in your psychology is ready and primed, ready to go to tear that apart and find everything wrong with it. Okay? It's precisely when you think something is true that you need the toolbox of critical thinking skills, and you have to apply it to what you think is the case, especially in cases where I've never had a reason to think it was false. Okay, well, but what reasons do I have for thinking that it's true, that it's always seemed obvious? This is what I meant earlier when I was talking about, like, I grew up thinking, of course it's true that Jehovah exists. I mean, if I said to you, Anthony, who's your daddy? And how do you know it? Because your mama told you so, right? What if I told you your daddy isn't who you think it is, it's some other guy? Right away, doubts are up, and you don't need to apply any critical thinking skills. They are automatically deployed. Yeah. And so we talk an awful lot about rationalization being a kind of automatic process and a kind of cognitive bias, right? But so is a kind of knee-jerk skepticism. And knee-jerk skepticism, I don't mean proper skepticism, I mean just listening to your doubts and immediately looking to find fault. That's effortless. No one needs to practice that. We're all masters of that already. And so really, what I see you doing with street epistemology, and what I see others doing, at least when they're doing it well by my lights, is what they're getting people to think about is things that they think are true, very often when they have never really thought it through, and you're exposing that they haven't thought it through. That often has the effect of raising doubts in people. But you don't have to sort of approach it. And it's funny, you said that word doubt is scary, whereas questioning isn't so scary. Why is doubt scary? In the case, here's another thing that in the case of religious beliefs, people talk about faith. They often mean something different than what a lot of non-believers understand it to be. Faith is an awful lot about faith is what does faith mean? Faith means fidelity. Well, what is fidelity? Fidelity is loyalty. People believe in being loyal to their beliefs. Now that, as a critical thinker and a skeptic, strikes me as just crazy. You should never be loyal to your beliefs, right? I mean, my beliefs serve me. I'm not going to serve my beliefs.
You're not beholden to them.
Right? I'm not beholden to my beliefs. My beliefs just have to strike me as true, but I don't owe them anything, right? But people often feel that they ought to be loyal, that they have a duty to serve their beliefs, and that it's infidelity, literally infidelity, faithlessness, to have doubts. And some religions really make that explicit. I mean, doubt is is synonymous with backsliding, with faithlessness, with turning your back on God. And so they never want to admit to having a doubt. But you can often get a person to say, well, no, I've never really questioned it. And they won't really have much problem with it because they think it's so obviously true. Why would they have questioned it? Everything speaks for it, nothing speaks against it. So they're happy to admit that they haven't questioned it. Or they'll say they questioned it, and then you'll say, okay, well, let's explore this. Let's question it now. But doubt, as you said, it is a scary word. It rankles. But that's because doubt, in the minds of many religious people in some religious traditions, is synonymous with infidelity, with disloyalty, right? And of course, I mean, if you think if there's a great God out there who's looking after you and he sacrificed his only begotten son for you and stuff like that, the least you can do is believe, right? I mean, as weird as that seems, a request, it seems disloyal to not believe, to at least not profess to believe. And so people don't want to profess to have doubts, right? Because they see that as a sin. It's characterized in their religion for many as a sin. But anyway, so I think the spirit in which you do street epistemology, Anthony, is in the spirit of trying to get people to understand the connection between what they believe and why. That's epistemology. That's the biggest chapter of epistemology is the question of justification and warrant. What gives rise to our beliefs and what gives us reason to think that those beliefs are true? That connection, that justificatory connection, that's what it's all about. And skepticism and critical thinking is all about questioning and interrogation. It's not about doubting. Anybody can doubt. We all doubt all the time effortlessly when we think something is false. What's hard is questioning something you think is true and then seeing if there's any doubt that arises from that.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic.
Much more difficult to do too. I think.
Yeah, I love that. That's awesome because this gives me a new way of thinking about what we're doing. And it seems like this thing that I run into is that you run to a lot of people who are closed. They are not even willing to entertain the idea that they're mistaken. So that seems to be like the first hurdle is helping a person become open to examining their beliefs. And you do that through questioning. Getting them to see the benefit of questioning is very important. And then, maybe doubt is that imparting outcome that happens after the questions start to happen. That's really cool.
And the theist argument that I've seen against street epistemology, it seems to stem from that, like I think what Ozzy was saying, that they think it's a sin to doubt, and the loyalty isn't so much to the belief. The loyalty is to what they perceive to be the deity, and to the scriptures and things of that nature. So when they say, well, street epistemology is getting the theist to think critically, as long as it's an honest approach, I find absolutely nothing wrong with that. If a theist if they have an argument against street epistemology that street epistemology is not an honest approach to it, then they would have some legitimacy to the concern. But I've watched a lot of things that I haven't seen anything dishonest. I haven't seen any dishonest approach from you or in any video that I've watched.
The only argument that I think has some merit against street epistemology that I've seen thus far is that sometimes we're a little careful on what we disclose at the start, because we recognize that doing so could cause a person to become defensive.
Right, which is understandable.
Why some of the more recent videos where I'm literally saying, my name is Anthony, I'd like to have a short little chat with you. I'm practicing something called street epistemology. It's this approach where I'm asking questions, and I'm going to challenge you a little bit. I'm going to try to get a sense of how sure you are. And there's even a chance that you might be less confident that your belief is true by the end of it. I've come to the point now where I'm just laying like all the cards on the table. And then I still get criticism that, well, you've just primed that person for change by telling them what you're up to. And now they're going to be more apt to actually change their mind. And you're going to get the result that you want because you've told them where you want to go with this.
No, I think that's being fair in your dialogue, though. I think that laying your cards on the table like that's fine. I do understand, though, not laying all your cards on the table because it does introduce bias that you don't really want to have in a discussion. And I think that if you approach that fairly enough and that you do disclose at some point, which I've seen you do, then there's no concern that I have. And that was one thing I got to admit when I first started watching your videos, I had a concern about. I'm like, is this person being, honest about what they believe if asked? Are they telling the person what the goal of these things are? And I completely understand now that you do that. If asked, you may postpone it toward the end.
I try to. Sometimes I forget. It's
funny.
funny. It's funny also.
That's honest. That's an honest approach, though.
But here's the thing: like you don't want to overwhelm your conversation partner by telling them too much. I do want people to agree to talk to me because it's hot out there, and I only have a certain amount of time, and I want to get a couple videos in. So some people even said, don't say that you're just asking what and why and how you could be so sure, because there are other things that you're doing here. So I've dropped the word "just" from my vocabulary. I'm just interviewing people to see what they believe and why. So it's funny how, throwing up these examples, and it's this constant improvement, I think, since I've been doing it. And I think I'll look back in 3 years and just cringe at the video that I uploaded 2 weeks ago because there was some horrible gaffe that I neglected to mention, or that I actually said at the start. And so this whole idea of not being completely upfront about what is probably the biggest criticism. But I think it is something that we can address, and we probably have an obligation to address it, and even give people a heads up that, depending on what belief you pick, if it's very tied to your identity and you begin to start questioning it and possibly doubting it, that it could be a hardship. It might be difficult for you. And in fact, I even asked somebody that recently. She was a little hesitant to do the interview. I think her name was Cherry. And I said, well, there is a chance that I might ask you some difficult questions here. And she took a moment. This is great because she took like 30 seconds and she was asking her God if she should participate in the talk. And lo and behold, he told her.
I think I watched that video. So I did watch that video. And you had asked her how, you asked her if, did, something along the lines, and she said, yeah, God said it was fine. It was like the first minute of the discussion. She said, yeah, God said it was fine for me to talk to you, right?
Right.
Yeah.
But that being said, I do think we have an obligation to let people know what we're up to. But there's a fine line because you don't want to overwhelm people, like I said. And, but if you disclose too much, you might actually jeopardize the nature of the conversation that you plan on having.
Sure. Well, I hope you got some takeaway from this particular hangout. I don't want to keep it too long because I know there's it gets weary real quick. Oh, this is a fascinating topic. I mean, I'm just thrilled that you're able to come on and talk to us about this because I find this to be
Thank you for inviting us. That was really great
and educational. I had my reservations. I was going to live talk to you for like about a month now. I've sussed, a few of them out with Ozzy and a few other people. I think that everything I had is kind of alleviated on my end. I'm actually enjoying watching the SE videos. I think they are a good way for people to question things. And I find nothing wrong with questioning. I think that people should question, especially the things that they normally wouldn't question. I find nothing wrong with that. And if SE facilitates that's great.
Speaking for SE, I guess right now, but we generally, the people in this community that are learning this method, want others to challenge what we're doing and question it, and that's what I love. Like, interviews are great, but when I'm challenged about what I'm doing, and like this discussion we had about doubt, like that was fascinating. That was great because that helps elevate this method, I think. So we want criticisms. We have a Facebook group where people who believe, regardless of what you believe, whatever, about a God or karma or whatever, it's a group where people can go to learn this method. And we want people to try to poke holes in it, and we want some rigor. We want this. We don't want to harm people with this method. We want to challenge people with it, and we're always looking for ways to improve it.
Ozzy, do you want to just add anything to that before we take this off? I asked live chat for questions, but they really didn't seem to have any. I think the only real question is somebody's concerned about maybe does SC somehow border on evangelism, which is a fair question, but. Do you want to address that first?
I can take that if you want.
Yeah. It's up to you guys.
Yeah, go ahead, Anthony.
And then I'll let Ozzy.
Yeah, that's a common question we get. Are you just as bad as Ray Comfort going out there and asking trick questions? And I think we addressed this early on, where I was saying that when we engage in street epistemology, we're asking questions, but we're not providing answers. Once we discover that a person has an unreliable epistemology for arriving at their belief, we don't then say, well, here's a more reliable way to go about doing this. We want to impart them with these questions, with doubt, and the tools. so that they can start engaging in this internal dialogue by themselves and with the people in their lives. So I think that's tremendously different than what you might see with someone who's proselytizing for Christianity or something like that.
Is it more that you're telling people how to think, not what to think? Therefore, it's not evangelizing.
I dropped the word telling. Like we're showing.
That's what I'm saying. You're not telling. You're not telling them what to think. You're showing them more how to think. Therefore, because I
guess maybe we're modeling more of a sense of skepticism and critical thinking and self-examination of your own beliefs. I made a tweet the other day, Dister, I think, something along the lines of, I would love to see two people who believe in gods use street epistemology on each other.
Yeah, that would be
interesting. I think that would be so interesting. Theists talk about doing this all the time, but I would love to see a theist attempt to use street epistemology. And I think it would become evident at which point it stopped being SE and it started becoming evangelizing.
I think it eventually would. I think if you have two theists, I think it would be hard for them to do a more of an unbiased approach. I mean, most theists I've seen, they have a very strong position, and they want to impart that position because it's part of their position. The part of a theistic, especially I would say the Christian theology, is to evangelize in some ways. That's part of their dogma. So I think it's kind of hard for them to probably sit back and have a discussion of this nature where you can't really evangelize. You try not to. You're not telling people, what's right, what's wrong. You're letting them kind of come to their own conclusions by showing them maybe a different thought process by which to evaluate their beliefs, right?
Yeah,
so it'd be interesting. Ozzy, go ahead real quick.
Well, I was just going to say I was relatively unfamiliar with street epistemology. I'd heard the term a few years ago, actually, I think. It was first mentioned to me. I had no idea what it was. I have to say I was immediately suspicious. My BS detectors went off immediately. Street epistemology, and then when I heard a little more about what it was about, I thought, okay, so this is going to be the atheist's version of Seitan Rubenkate's.
That was my concern too. I'm not going to lie.
But then I started watching some of these videos, and I had a few conversations with Anthony, and I have to say I'm enormously impressed with what you're modeling, and I think that's the right word to use. You're modeling, you're showing, you're demonstrating how to have these very open-ended conversations, and they give rise to whatever they give rise to. But this is sort of skepticism and critical thinking being taught in a kind of natural, organic way, not in a dry lecture hall. Here are some fallacies, and these are inference rules or anything like that. You're just getting people to sort of think about the relationship between what they think is true and why they think it's true, and then bringing to light whether or not that makes any sense in light of everything else they already believe and how they think about everything else. I don't think that there's anything pernicious or sneaky about that. I think it's and if you look at the manner in which these conversations go, I mean, most of the time, Anthony and the others who are doing this are incredibly polite, incredibly civil. They're confronting people. They're confronting them with their own incredulity, but they are not being combative, and it's enormously successful. You see people stop and think, as opposed to just coming up with something on the seat of their pants, or parroting something that they've heard. And even when they're parroting something that they've heard, because they're not being told, well, that argument's BS, because they're being asked, to explain, the logic behind something or something like that. The light of reason is shining on themselves and their own apologetics, and that is really, really strong corrosive acid. There's no one's ever going to make you doubt your beliefs more than yourself, and the light of reason is the best thing that can do that. Simply blasting somebody with counter apologetics is not very good. Very often you get a backfire effect, and so you get the opposite result of what you might set out. So I think that street epistemologists, as I've seen them in their videos so far, are doing a good job of modeling the kind of conversations that we want to see more of, and it exemplifies the true spirit of skepticism and critical thinking. So I would recommend these videos to anybody, and anyone who's inclined to take up this approach. Talk to Anthony and those who are doing it, and get some advice on doing it. I don't know that I am myself, sort of by my temperament and disposition, the best person to go and talk to total strangers on the street. It's not really my style.
You take the whole 5 minutes.
And sorry, but I would really recommend anybody give it a try. I would eat up too much oxygen in these conversations.
I would enjoy it. I'm not gonna lie. I think I would love enjoying it, but unfortunately, I can never do this by myself. I am better in a pair kind of thing. Somebody would actually have to be like recording. I couldn't imagine myself by myself engaging like this. I don't think I have the presence of mind as far as my self-assurity to do that. I could do it online. I have discussions all the time. I love being outgoing online, but in real life, not so much. I think it takes a very special, unique skill set that I see you having.
It takes self-control.
It's funny, once you learn this, sure. and yeah, it's not for everybody. Aaron Rana even went out with me once. There's a video. It's on his channel.
Oh God, I would love to see Aaron Rana.
Go to Aaron's channel.
Does he have
Aaron actually gave SE a try.
Was it?
And if he can give it a try, I think we can give it a try.
How'd it go?
Somebody likened it to lighting a cigarette with a flamethrower. So
Aaron is larger than life. I have the utmost respect for Aaron. He's been in here many times. I mean, we disagree philosophically, but I tell you, he is larger than life character. What's that?
He really gave it a fair shake. And I have to just caution everybody, you don't have to be on the street to do street epistemology. Most of these conversations are happening organically when somebody makes a claim and they're familiar with the method. They watched a few videos and they ask a couple of questions, or they happen online, that type of thing. But even if you would never go out and do this, there's no reason why you couldn't try to, online or text-based. I found though that SE seems easier for myself when I am in front of the person, whether it's a video chat or preferably face-to-face, where I can start looking at body language and modeling, the gestures that I might want them to actually demonstrate and that type of thing.
You definitely get more feedback face-to-face. More body.
Yeah, I think face-to-face is just way more advantageous for this method, but there's no reason why you can't use it anywhere.
Well, if somebody thinks that they want to try their hand at it, we'll give it a shot on another hangout where somebody can tell me, yeah, they want to try it. I'll find somebody they can try it against, and then we could kind of run with it and just kind of see how it goes. I think it'd be kind of a fun hangout, actually.
That'd be great. There's also a Chat with a Street Epistemologist Facebook group where you can go, and if you have a belief that you want somebody to use SE on, you can go there, and there are hundreds of people in that group that would be more than happy to have that chat.
I'm in that group. I was nice enough for you. You invited me to that group, and I have joined it.
Oh, nice.
I haven't really participated in it, but you wouldn't mind me asking for somebody to maybe come on this channel at the Great Debate Community and run a Street Epistemology, maybe with like, for example, I know we have people in our live chat that would actually be more than willing to be street epistemologized. I don't know what's the word for. I don't know what word to use for the person being questioned. I guess.
Challenged.
There's got to be a better term for that.
I always hate doing live demonstrations because if it doesn't go well, then the viewers get the impression that, oh wow, this is just bunk. I have literally hundreds of examples on my channel, and they're as real as you can possibly get. You usually see it from the second the person walks by, to me explaining what I'm doing, to them agreeing to pick a topic, to them being questioned and challenged, and then walking away having enjoyed the talk. So it almost does a disservice to the method to try to do something on the fly. I know people want to see it, but I'm always a little concerned that if it doesn't go well, people will just kind of throw up their hands and not take an interest in it.
Yeah, no, and I understand that. I think this would be more of a, this. I think I hate the word entertaining because it shouldn't be just for entertainment. I mean, that's obviously not what street epistemology is for, but it should be informative more than anything else, right? And I think that if I could find somebody that is willing to come on and try it on air with somebody, it obviously in a positive light. It's not a gotcha type thing, but just see how it kind of plays out. I think it'd be very interesting to watch, to say the least.
Yeah, I mean, the questions that we tend asking don't vary all that much. We want to understand what the person believes, why, and how they're so sure. And you can apply that template to pretty much any belief, whether it's a God belief or they think that there's a deceased relative coming back to say hello, or their view on karma, or a political topic. So there's not too much variation, which is good and bad. Like it's sort of not bad, but these are not the most entertaining videos to watch. Like if people want to be entertained, they would much probably rather watch Aaron argue with Kent Hovind or something
I
like
think
that.
I think it's your definition of entertainment. I find it to be entertaining, and I mean that.
I do too.
Sincerely,
Like
but
I think these I've watched my own stuff over and over again, even after I've spent hours editing them, because I think they're just fascinating and how people are forming these beliefs.
yeah, it's a
And
different form
then
of entertainment.
those moments of wonder where they like Ozzy was mentioning, you know, actually seeing people stopping and thinking about these beliefs and how they're so sure, and they're just like,
That
you know,
pause moment, right?
and giving them the time to think about that. That's gold. That is just gold to have people modeling how these conversations can be, and then other people learning from them. So it's a little discouraging sometimes when I see how few subscribers I do have and how few views these videos do have.
Well, we're going to help you try to
Because
change that, even though you've got far more subs than I've got. But
they're not everyone's cup of tea. They're not that exciting unless you're really into respectful conversation and making a difference.
but I think it is a different form of entertainment. I mean, I have numerous videos on my own channel with Hovind engaging with people. I mean, I've hosted how many debates now with Kent? I mean, his secretary wants me to debate him, and I just don't. I know that would be entertaining. I know people have asked me to do it, but I have some reservations on that. That's why I have not done it so far, even though I've engaged with him prior on other things, but there wasn't really a debate. It was just a discussion like this. But I think the term entertaining is depending on who wants to get something out of it. And I find the Street Epistemology videos entertaining. So, you know, go
I think,
subscribe to him.
you know, it's a spectrum. There are some people who are in the right frame of mind and they're looking for something different, and they really find the SE approach appealing. Other people, they think it's just that, you know, that's just, why are you treating that theist with such respect? You should be telling
I
them
get
how
that all the
stupid
time
they are.
too.
There are certain videos that appeal to them. So I'm not dissing the people that are catering to that market. That's fine. But I do think that people, you know, this appeals to a certain type of person, and maybe, you know, when you're done with your angry atheist phase and you're getting frustrated with not making any progress with your believing family and friends, then maybe give the SE approach a try.
And I'm right there with you, because I've actually had people tell me that I shouldn't be nice to Kent, right? And it's just like, wait a minute, I disagree vehemently with Kent. I mean, we are not even in the same universe as far as what we agree and disagree on. But when he comes on my channel, I'm going to give him the respect of a guest. And if he's going to have a formal debate with somebody, I'm going to be the impartial moderator. I have no other choice but to do that. And when people say, well, you know, you just kind of, you're giving him validity, you're giving him justification for what he believes, I'm like, no, I'm not. I'm just allowing a platform where somebody else can confront what he's saying. So I definitely understand that with you. So anyways, I want to keep this under 2 hours. We're at the 2 hour mark. Anthony, I really wanted to thank you for coming in. This was great. Hopefully we can definitely do it again.
For sure. Thank you for inviting me on. It was a lot of fun.
And Ozzy, I'm glad that you were able to stop by. I know it was kind of a question there if you could actually make it or not. But the link to join Anthony's channel is in the description below. So please, by all means, sub to him. I know he should have a lot more. I know he's got quite a few, but I think we could boost him up a little bit. And then if you kind of show his videos to other people, and one of those, you know, tell a friend, tell a friend, tell a friend, then we can exponentially, you know, increase his viewership. And my goal for the Great Debate community is, look, if other people get views, then I get views, and if I get views, they get views. It's a rising tide kind of lifts all ships kind of thing. So I do appreciate him coming in. Hopefully we have more discussions on this. This is not a topic that we're going to forget. I definitely think there was edification here of how to think critically and learning more about street epistemology, and as Anthony said, questioning it and improving upon it. I think he actually got something he might be able to prove upon here, which is the whole thing about doubt. I think that's something that really should be examined. I think that could even make street epistemology even better by reformulating what we mean by doubt and skepticism. But Anthony, you want to give a last word real quick before I take it off? You want to mention your channel? Anything else you want to promote?
Yeah, sure. Well, thank you very much for having me on your show, Steve. Really appreciate it. And Ozzy, that was a real treat to have you on too. Thank you. And I just love the discussion that we had. You can find me on Twitter. I tweet a few times a day. I also tweet links to any new videos that I release. So Twitter is probably the best place to follow my work. It's at Magnabosco, which is my last name, Magnabosco. And message me. I'm as accessible as anybody can be. If you have a criticism or a suggestion, please send it my way, and I'll help percolate that through the community, and we can try to make this thing even better.
And don't forget to like this video and subscribe to this channel as well, and share this video with your friends. Thanks, guys.